Hello. Welcome back to the channel. We are back for our Tuesdays with Dr. Susan series. I know a lot of our audience is watching either Emily D. Baker go over crazy Karen Reed stuff or watching closing arguments over on Recovery Addict, because that's what I've been doing all day today. So if you're catching us on replay, crew, you are absolutely welcome. Today we are going to be talking about self-monitoring. I hope you all had a great week. I spent most of my week nursing a back that decided it didn't want to do back things anymore because I don't know, sat wrong or something. Love being in my 40s, but I am upright today, so that is good. I'm going to go ahead and run the intro, and then we'll bring Dr. Susan on and we will get started.
Hi, I'm Nicole, and as you have probably guessed, I have ADHD. I live and breathe all things ADHD in my personal, family, and professional life. I have a background in psychology and special education, and I've gained a lot of knowledge over the years about ADHD, what it really is, how it touches every aspect of your life and the life of your child, as well as a wealth of information and strategies for living with ADHD and parenting kids with ADHD. In this community, we share stories, we learn together, and we support each other as we navigate all things ADHD. Welcome.
Hello, Susan. How are you doing today?
Hello, Nicole. I'm happy to be here again.
Awesome. Why don't you go ahead and give a quick, brief introduction for those who are new to this series?
I am Dr. Susan Blumberg. I am a life coach for parents, teens, and young adults who struggle with communication, organization, and launching to the next stage of their life. I am formerly a licensed clinical psychologist, and I have two twice exceptional children who are young adults in their 20s. And twice exceptional means kids who are both gifted and have a disability label of some kind, which comprise the majority of my clientele, but not always. Most of the kids and young adults I work with have a disability label of some kind, but basically are struggling with their relationships with their family, with school, and with life.
Awesome. Thank you much. Susan and I have been meeting in some form like this for almost 5 years, I think.
Almost 5 years.
In 2020 over on Clubhouse when that was a thing during the pandemic. And then we have moved around on a few different platforms and had lunch a couple of times. And I've called Susan with my emergencies to get her advice on things I was going through with my own kids in the school. She's just a wealth of experience and knowledge. And I'm so glad to have her on the channel with me every week to do this.
Thank you so much for always inviting me. I love being here.
So I know we've got a hard stop today, so let's go ahead and jump in to our topic of the day. We've been going through different executive functioning skills a little bit. I don't want to say in depth because I feel like
we try.
You and I could talk about each of these things for 4 or 5 hours, and we're trying to condense it into one. So, but if you have any questions, put them in the chat. If you have any other questions for Susan or for myself, put them in the chat. Or if you're on replay, crew, send us a comment and we can address them on future streams. We just plan on talking about a bunch of different ADHD related topics for both parenting kids with ADHD and adults with ADHD, because it tends to be a big crossover group, right? So today we're talking about self-monitoring. So if you're looking through kind of all of the lists of executive skills, right, everybody kind of has their own list. There's a lot of crossover in those lists. There's a lot of different definitions for things, but they tend to kind of all clump into these same categories. And for me, self-monitoring, I see it as more of a one of the some of the executive skills we talk about are things that like we just need to accommodate for, and some of them seem to be more that they are skills that with practice and with intention we can build, even though they don't necessarily come easily to us. And self-monitoring is one that I think crosses over those categories, right? It is a skill of its own, but it's also a tool that we can use to build other skills. But it is a little bit of, and one of my courses I was taking for executive coaching talked about it as one of the more higher order executive skills, right? One that is going to develop later for even typical brains. So teenagers are not necessarily great at self-monitoring. Young adults, not necessarily great at self-monitoring, because even those who are typically developing, right, not all of their executive skills and that frontal lobe is fully developed until mid-20s.
So I'm going to
Our
interrupt
findings.
you.
Okay.
Because I'm going to disagree with your last
Okay.
statement pretty strongly.
All right.
So I think this is something that neurotypical children develop extremely young.
Okay.
So let's discuss our definitions of self-monitoring, and then we can see why we disagree about that last point. So what's your definition of self-monitoring?
So for me, self-monitoring is the ability to kind of recognize a target behavior or recognize what you're doing and then be able to change it in some way. And I guess maybe the part of self-monitoring that I feel like develops later is the metacognition piece, right? It's not all self-monitoring requires metacognition, but when you get into kind of young adult and adults, the types of behaviors that we are going to be monitoring are more metacognitive in nature, right? Thinking about what you're thinking. And that, I believe, is the skill that develops later.
Metacognition develops later.
Yes.
Self-monitoring, if you go into any room with 2 and 3-year-olds, neurotypical ones, they self-monitor constantly. Somebody knocks over your tower of blocks, you start to cry, the other kid rushes over and hugs you and then starts to help you build your tower of blocks again. That is self-monitoring because you have noticed that your behavior has had an impact on another person. And so then you do something to change your behavior in order to have a more successful social interaction. That is self-monitoring. So self-monitoring, I'm looking up my definition, is the ability to adjust one's behavior to fit in with social situations. It can also refer to the act of observing one's own behavior. Examples are imitating others' behaviors, asking others for advice, trying to gain approval, and being aware of how others perceive you. So even that 2-year-old who knocked over the other kid's blocks, thinking it was funny, saw the first kid cry, run over to hug them and help them rebuild the blocks, is aware of the impact of their behavior on the other person and change their behavior by helping them rebuild the blocks. That is an example of self-monitoring. So it actually happens in neurotypical children at the very youngest ages.
Maybe my problem is I don't have any neurotypical children.
Yeah, it could be. So you didn't see it happen in your family.
Much less, and even in my experience in teaching, I was working in special ed. So while it wasn't always with kids with ADHD and autism, there was always some kind of developmental difference with 90% of the kids that I have ever worked with.
Yeah, so I minored in developmental psychology in college, and I taught preschool in my religious school, and this behavior is very evident in neurotypical children from a very young age. And then I taught second graders, and you see it there too. So I had a kid with ADHD who had a lot of trouble sitting still in his chair. And he was always knocking his chair over, or he'd, stand up and kick it back. And so we had a rule in our classroom and the other kids would make fun of him because he was always, fidgeting in his chair. And we had these terrible old folding chairs. So when he was having difficulty concentrating, we would put his chair in timeout. I didn't put him in timeout when he had trouble concentrating. We put his chair in timeout, and he could stand up at the table and draw and do the exercises. And all of a sudden, his behavior improved enormously because he had difficulty with his fidgeting and his legs and those terrible folding chairs that collapsed all the time. Didn't match his behavior well. So rather than focus in on his behavior that he didn't have control over, we got rid of the cause or the trigger of the behaviors. We would put his chair in timeout until he was able to better concentrate. Now, all the other kids who would maybe bully him a little or make jokes about his behavior, they were self-monitoring. All of a sudden, they noticed that his behavior changed when we got rid of the chair. And all the bullying and all the comments about him not being able to fit in with the class, all those neurotypical kids who were self-monitoring stopped those comments because they noticed that his behavior changed when we put his chair in timeout. So self-monitoring is a naturally occurring behavior in children from a young age. But the kids with issues with dealing with overstimulation, with social deficits, with understanding what Michelle Garcia Winner calls reading the room, right? So she teaches behaviors to help with self-monitoring.
Yes.
Have you been through some of her trainings, Nicole?
I haven't been through any trainings. We are actually in the process of deciding which packages to get for our office. We're starting some social skills groups. So I have read a lot of her stuff.
Her stuff is great.
I have not been through any trainings.
So she teaches our neurodivergent kids how to self-monitor.
Yes.
Which means how to look at your behavior and does it match what other kids are doing? Is it different what other kids are doing? And she talks about reading the room. So she talks about using your eyes to see how other kids are behaving and then to think about how your behavior matches or doesn't match what's happening. That's self-monitoring.
Yeah. And what's interesting about some of that is sometimes our kids actually get pretty good at some of that, right? They become excellent at masking.
There you go.
Right?
Now, is that self-monitoring? Let's talk about that. What's the difference between masking and self-monitoring?
That's a really interesting question. Hadn't thought about it yet. So let's see. So my go-to with self-monitoring when I was teaching in class, we would use it as an intervention for troublesome classroom behaviors that out of seat, off task, those sorts of things. But I was trying to think of it from my perspective as an adult, where do I see problems with self-monitoring for myself? Some of that is physically not checking in with my body and knowing when I'm hungry, when I need to go to the bathroom, drink water, things like that, right? Particularly when getting into hyperfocus. Emotionally, it ties back into what we talked about last week with self-regulation, right? That's stopping and checking in on where I am, maybe not realizing that I have gone past my limit until I've blown my top.
Good point.
Which obviously can impact relationships. The hardest one for me that I have had to work on a lot is in conversation.
Excuse me, I just got out of focus. I'm going to futz with my camera.
Yep, go ahead.
There, that's
conversationally, I'm a very fast processor. My brain's going here, right? So if someone's telling me something, I feel like I've got the gist of what they're saying already. It's very hard for me to let them finish their thought. This happens with my husband a lot. We used to get into arguments early in our marriage about how I was always interrupting him. And there was a couple of reasons why, it would happen. Number one, if I didn't get the thought out, then I would lose the thought by the time he finished his train. He can be very detailed when he's talking about things he's excited about, books, movies, things like that. He'll give like a lot of information and my brain would wander, and then I would jump in with something random and he'd be like, "You're not listening to me and you're interrupting me." I was like, "Well, I heard everything you said." And then this thought came to my mind, right? So this is something that in relationships I've had to work really hard to monitor, pausing, making sure I'm letting people finish their thoughts and, not interrupting. And some of that is specific to the situation, right? I've got one group of friends where it's banter like this, da, 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 and we can jump 15 different directions and it's great. There are other situations where either people are more introverted and they need time to get their things out and I can tend to plow over them. Or, there's just not every thought that I have needs to be said out loud.
So let me stop you there because you gave some really good examples. The question was, what's the difference between masking and self-monitoring? And you gave some examples of both in your answer.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you to tease them apart. I know the answer, and I'm going to push you.
You're going to make me work.
Yeah, I'm going to make you work. Oh. What is the difference between masking and self-monitoring? And your answer gave some examples of both. Can you tell them apart?
In my mind, I am not a person with autism, and I know there's a whole conversation about masking
but ADHD
and autism and things like that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to say that I'm speaking for all people, but for me, masking to me comes with a level of anxiety about the situation, of being unsure how I'm supposed to, like, what the prescribed behavior is or how I should present in a specific situation.
Yep.
As opposed to just like, I know when I'm going to a movie theater that I can't be talking at the movie theater, right? But if I'm going to, say, a new scenario, a meeting for something that this is my first time in the group, but I don't know the group rules, that I think would be a time when I would be more prone to masking some of and holding myself back, more because I don't know what's expected of me in that situation.
You're close. You're getting there. But let me give you some more guidelines.
Great.
So if we define self-monitoring, give your meeting situation.
Mm-hmm.
You could self-monitor in that meeting situation. You could do what Michelle Garcia Winner says, read the room, use your eyes, see how other people are behaving. Going to a fancy restaurant if you haven't been to one before. You can see what silverware other people are using, how other people are using their napkins, and follow the etiquette that you see around you, just like you might in that meeting. That's not masking. That's self-monitoring. You're watching to see how other people behave in novel situations, and you're learning new rules. That's self-monitoring, even in a new business meeting situation. Masking, when you said anxiety, you were much closer. Yeah. Masking is squelching how you normally behave and not accepting who you are as a person and faking it. So you're not self-monitoring. You're not learning new rules. You're faking it. You're stopping yourself from being who you are as a person right? Pretending to be somebody else. And then when you're in a safe situation, you end up having that emotional dysregulation we talked about last week. If you're self-monitoring, you don't have to go to emotional dysregulation, because what you're doing is you're incorporating what you have learned about the situation into how you choose to behave. And so it doesn't result in emotional dysregulation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting discussion. And this is not even anywhere in what my notes for what we would talk about today would go. But I feel like in kind of the public discussion right now, masking is a big buzzword.
Yes.
And I think this distinction is really important,
Yes.
right? And I think it's something that is not clear out there, that you can self-monitor, you can adjust behavior to meet a social situation, you can behave one way here and one way there because that's what is required for the situation, and it's not necessarily masking. So what I'm hearing from you is that the masking is the definition difference is going to be more of how much discomfort it brings to you when you're doing it. So my question then is, say you're someone with social anxiety or autism spectrum, where those social situations are distressing in and of themselves. How does a person kind of differentiate between what is appropriate self-monitoring for a situation and what is masking?
It's a really good question. So I go back to my definition. The benefits of self-monitoring are helping people increase desired behaviors or skills, help people complete tasks accurately. For example, if you're in school and you're masking, you can't necessarily get your schoolwork done because you're putting all your emotional energy into maintaining your emotional facade. And you don't have energy left over to concentrate on listening to the teacher, to get the directions, and then do your work. Because you're spending all your time maybe suppressing your stims, or suppressing your emotional reactions, or suppressing your sensory overload. That's masking. And because you're spending your time masking, you're not getting your tasks done. So self-monitoring also helps you become more aware of your symptoms and bodily sensations. You said this right at the beginning of our session today, right? You know when you're learning, when you're hungry, learning when you're in emotional sensory overload. And if you're masking, you tend to miss all those cues and then do what I said earlier, which is when you get to a safe place, you explode.
Meltdown. Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people say, my kid is great at school, no behavior problems. And then they come home and they're a disaster.
Right.
Because they've been masking all day, not self-monitoring. And the last one is helping people create awareness of their daily activities and cognitive processes. If you're self-monitoring, then you're aware of what's happening to you during the day. If you're masking, you're not aware of what's happening to you. And therefore, you're not either aware of why you're coming home and going, blah! And exploding because you don't know what you've been doing all day. You've just been struggling to get by.
Yeah, I think this is something I think we'll need to dive down again in the future, because a lot of the talk in treatment for autism right now is there's kind of lots of different camps, right? And if there's like the acceptance of neurodivergence versus therapies to fit in, right? And so it's a nuanced definition, but it is important. Like there are skills you can work on, there are things you can do, and you're not doing it for other people, right? You're doing it for yourself so that you can be in those situations and be in control of what's going on in your body and know this is a time when I need to take a break, and you can advocate for yourself. And it's not the same thing. You know, I was just saying, we're starting up some social skills groups at our clinic. And there's a lot of back and forth about whether or not you should even try and teach that teaching social skills in and of itself is not neuroaffirming and is teaching kids how to mask. And I completely disagree.
Well, I'm gonna add to your confusion. So Michelle Garcia Winner, there's a lot of criticism of her work saying it's not neuroaffirming. But in fact, I believe it's more neuroaffirming than most social skills approaches.
Yes.
And I'm going to say even what you're doing is not as neuroaffirming as what Michelle does. Michelle does not take a social skills. She is not teaching social skills.
Right.
She teaches what we call social competency.
Thinking. Yeah. Right.
She calls it social thinking, but it's actually called social competency. And it's all about what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
It's all about how do you look around a room and see how other people are behaving, and how do you fit in, not by, again, masking your neurodivergence, but how do you use your skills, your strengths, to be able to
contribute
to
the social conversation, right? How can I join in here and be a part of this group as I am, not how can I jump in here and fit to what the other people are doing.
So
and again, that nuance of like, we are matching our behavior to the setting in a way, but we are doing it in our way, right? We're not.
So many social skills approaches, traditional social skills approaches, take turns, ask questions, initiate. I see this in schools all the time.
Yes.
What they're trying to do is get neurodivergent people to act neurotypical.
Right. That
is not neuroaffirming.
Correct.
And I caution you, when you think about the social skills groups you're starting, to avoid that. That is not neuroaffirming.
Right.
What Michelle Garcia Winner does is say to the neurodivergent person, talk about your special interests, talk about what's important to you, but do it in a way that helps you fit into the group.
Right. And monitoring, okay, this other person, they might want to know 3 facts about insects. They don't want to know 37,000, and I can give them 3. And then we can connect on these, and then we can, being able to recognize when the other person is wanting. So you're not talking at a person, you're talking with a person.
This is a core of the social competency approach, and it's the core of self-monitoring. So again, let's go back to your attending a meeting with a new group of people. Whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, right? You don't want to walk into that meeting. Okay, I'll finish this example and I'll give you another. You don't want to walk into that meeting and say, I know everything about this topic. If you're the newest hire in the company and there are very experienced people there.
Yes.
What do you have to learn? You have to learn who is the senior person here? Who should I be showing respect to? When is it appropriate for me to put in what I do know about this topic? Now,
and what's the structure of the group? How do they order things? Who talks and when? When is it open forum for everyone to bounce ideas? And when is it turn taking? Like, these are all things when you're going into a new environment.
And I want to say very clearly, you might know more about the topic than everybody else.
Right.
But that doesn't make it appropriate for you to share that in this first meeting you've ever been to.
Sure.
So that's also something you have to navigate through self-monitoring.
Right.
You said 3 facts versus 37,000. It's also a question of showing respect to authority. And that's something difficult for many neurodivergent people.
Yes.
So how do you read the cues in the room? That's a lot of what the social competency approach, as opposed to traditional social skills groups don't teach that.
Right. They give scripts and things that, number one, don't generalize in normal conversations, but they also aren't teaching. They might be like, okay, we take turns when we talk. Okay, well, how about instead, when do you know that it's time for you to talk? When do you know that the other person is finished? When do you know that the other person wants you to talk? What kinds of
This is all
questions, those are right. So,
see, and neurotypical people start learning this as a young toddler.
yeah, it
Whenever they're
comes more
interacting with other
innately to
people,
them.
right?
Yeah.
They learn it from a very young age. The
And some
piece
of it
they
is that
don't learn,
theory of mind piece, right? Of being able
right?
to put yourself in another person's shoes and see things
Exactly.
from other perspectives, all things that are difficult for
Exactly.
us
So going
spicy
back
mind
to where
people.
we started, do you see why I disagreed with you about the development of
Yes.
self-monitoring?
Yes.
So now what I did agree with you is metacognition. Metacognition, for
Yes.
those who are listening and don't know, is the ability to think about your thinking,
Right.
right? So metacognition would be to say to yourself, I did well in this meeting because I waited to share, or I did badly in this meeting because I blurted out 37,000 facts. That doesn't come until adulthood.
Yes.
But the natural impulse to, oh, I knocked over your toy and you cried, I'll hug you and help you.
Sure.
That's self-monitoring, and that starts in babyhood.
Sure. Obviously, it gets more sophisticated
Right.
over time.
Should we talk? Do you have more to say about the definitions of self-monitoring?
No, I wanted to talk about, what are some ways, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are ways that we can develop this skill, both helping students and parents, but also for adults trying to develop the skill for themselves.
Absolutely. So one way to help adults, if they think about self-monitoring as the ability, I'm reading from my document, ability to assess your progress on your own work. If you're highly anxious about the outcome of your work or about your ability to do it at all, you're going to struggle with self-monitoring.
That doesn't bode well for those of us with ADHD and anxiety who have
and autism.
Grown up getting lots and lots and lots of negative feedback and are always unsure of ourselves.
So the first strategy I teach people are calming techniques. This is an anxiety issue, always first. So before you can take that step back and institute a new strategy, you do your box breathing, you do your relaxation technique, you take 5 minutes and get some fresh air. It's always about stepping away from the anxiety-producing situation and getting a hold of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about last week with emotional regulation, right? Same thing. We got to get out of that lizard brain and get things firing again, because when you're in that heightened state, that metacognition piece, right? That ability to think about what we're thinking, to check in with ourselves, is just not there.
Same with our teens. So, or younger children, if they're feeling stressed because they've messed up a test, they got bad feedback in their group, they were working on a group project and the other kid said, you did it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Talking to them about it is not the answer. Or saying to them, why didn't you do it this way or that way, which is what a lot of parents do, right?
And I'm going to interject there a little bit, because, one of the ways that we teach our teens to monitor, right, is by asking them questions and having them think about that. However, when you've got kids who are used to having missed things or have all that negative feedback, or, they will often see those questions as an interrogation and immediately go here, right? Especially your kids with ODD. The minute you start asking questions, oh, why did you do it that way? Even if you are asking completely neutral and you're just trying to honestly get them to reflect on their thinking process or help you to understand their thinking process, they might automatically jump into, you're attacking me, right?
Exactly.
This is a problem I have with my teens all the time. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm just asking a question because I don't know the answer. So let's take it down a notch and just listen to my question and just answer my question because I'm just trying to understand.
So
That
I
does require
always-
us to make sure that we aren't going in accusatory most of the time because you know, we're training them
which
up for
means
that
allowing
reaction.
our teens a break after school
Mhm.
for a snack, lying down,
Yeah.
text their friends. It's absolutely critical they get break time before
Yes.
we start analyzing what happened in school that day.
Yes.
Now, it might be an hour, but it should, it shouldn't be, we shouldn't get back to the homework after dinner. So we're doing it at, 9:00 at night.
Times when our brains aren't working well.
Right. All their meds have worn off, whatever it is.
Mhm.
We give them an hour and then we get started, and we have to remain emotionally neutral, like we talked about last time. So just like many of these other strategies we've talked about, calming and getting back to a sense of emotional regulation is always the first step. And we've talked about some second steps, but one of the really important things here when you're talking about self-monitoring is to have a rubric of some kind.
Yes.
And it can be written down. It can just be a few bullet points. It can be a matrix. It depends on your kid. What's important is to have some way to measure your progress.
Yeah.
And what I say to parents and to the teens and young adults I work with is focus on your process, not on your outcome.
Yeah. So, and I think also, one of the notes I did have down, getting really specific and well-defined on a behavior. But remembering that we have to start small with one thing at a time, right? We cannot eat the whole elephant in one bite. We have to focus on the overarching goal, which is not
No. I'm going to interrupt you. I mean exactly the opposite.
Okay.
I mean exactly the opposite. I'm saying don't look at the end goal.
I'm saying let me finish what my end goal is.
Okay.
The end goal is developing the skill of self-monitoring. So that's what we're focusing on, right? We're not focusing on all of these things here. We're focusing on, we are developing a skill of self-monitoring, and we're going to use this behavior to do it, and then we can build on it from there.
Yeah, because what I find is parents say, you've got to pass that test. You have to get an A in this class, or you have to bring up your grade from a C to a B. And that's what they focus on. What did you get on your quiz? What did you get on your essay? And I want to say is focus on perseverance and effort. Did you work on your
getting an
homework
A in that class could be a 55-step goal, right? We don't
exactly.
What's one thing we can do? Okay, the goal we're going to set is working on our math homework every day and turning in math assignments on time. That's it.
Go.
Right? That's going to be the first step. If that doesn't get to then passing the test, then we're going to go, okay, what can we do to work on a study skill for the test? We're going to pick one step of the process. But if we're because what we're teaching is picking a thing and monitoring on that thing, which will then carry over to other skills later in life, right?
There you go.
I am overwhelmed with my whole house. My goal can't be, I need to clean my entire house every day. Never going to happen. I can focus on, I am going to make my bed every day for 2 weeks. And then the next step, but I got to have a way to kind of monitor that progress, right?
That's where a rubric or a matrix, check off that you made your bed, check off that I tried my math homework. It's
And
a
I
process.
when I used to do kind of self-monitoring with kids at school, right? So one of the behaviors we would use it often on is either being on task or being in your seat area. I'm not necessarily a person who's like the kid has to sit in their chair, right? But they do need to stay in their confined space, whether they're standing or sitting or whatever. So this was pre-smartphone days. So I had a program on my computer, or we have these little things called motivators. Do you remember the motivators?
No.
They look like a little pager that you could clip on their belt, and you could set it either to fixed or random intervals, and
How
how many
super.
and they would stick it on their pocket and it would vibrate, right? And so every time the thing would vibrate,
Honey.
they had to give themselves a score. And I like a rating scale over a yes or no, right? Are you on task
Agreed.
5? Not just yes or no. And then we would base their reward at the end of the period or the end of the day, whenever we were doing it, on how many times they matched what their teacher scored them at the same time.
That's complicated.
So it was complicated, but it took out I'm just going to give myself a 5 every time and get all the points, right? Because the closer, and it was, within a range, did you match your teacher 8 out of
Within a
10
point.
times, right? Yeah.
Now,
So
let me
that
give a quick statement
they're
here.
actually reflecting on, am I on task right now?
Yes.
I'm a
Thank
2,
you.
instead of just saying I'm a 5 every time so that I can get all my points.
It's so important that we say what was helpful about that was that they had to be honest about how they were behaving.
Right.
I want to mention, because families will understand this, this is not like the clip it things that teachers use nowadays,
No.
which are based on humiliating a child
Yeah,
publicly
no.
by showing everybody in the class how badly a child is doing.
Right.
These are detrimental to children. And
No, it was
I will
not publicly
strongly
posted.
recommend
The kid
every
had a
parent object and tell their teachers they will not allow their child to participate in that.
No. This was like they would have a sticker chart inside their desk, and they would put it on, and the teacher just had like a chart on her desk.
What
and
a great idea.
And then the end of the class period,
I love that every kid had their own pager. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have them for everyone, but we had a good handful of them.
Kids who were dealing
But when I was in a classroom that was all behavior stuff, I had one that would go on a speaker on my computer. So every kid was monitoring a different behavior, and when the chime would go off, everyone would mark.
I wish we had this for my son. We just had it on paper for him.
Yeah. So it was so what's the equivalency now? Well, now I've got my circles on my Apple Watch, right? That tell me to stand up every hour. And there's tons of apps and things you can do that can do this sort of thing, right? Set up an interval, make a chime that reminds you to check in. It could be check in, do a body scan. It could be check in on, am I doom scrolling on my phone? Whatever the skill is that I'm trying to do, something to remind me to check into it. And over time, that constant reminding, I will start to just check in with myself. And I may always need a reminder. Who cares?
Great idea for self-monitoring. So we need to wrap up in the next 8 minutes or so.
Yes.
What do you think are the takeaways parents should have from our talk today, Nicole?
I think a big one that I kind of underline multiple time is that this is a skill that we're building. It requires practice.
Yes.
And we are working on, it's not something that happens in a day, right? It's not like, I'm just going to set this goal and by tomorrow I'm going to be done, right? It is something that it's going to take time. It's going to take practice. There's going to be failure, and that's going to be okay. Tracking it well, having defined behaviors, defined skills that you're working on, and keeping track of it is important for a number of reasons. But one big one is it can show us progress over time,
Yes.
right? So we can see in a month, well, they still don't have an A on the test. Okay, but let's look at their progress. Have they met goal number 1, goal number 2? And maybe we get to that A at the end of the term, but maybe we don't. And maybe we get to an improvement in some area, right? We have to be careful where we set those expectations and that they're achievable. Because the more goals we set and let our kids fail, that just adds to that history of failure for them.
See, I want to phrase it a little differently. I want to say that by looking at the process, the steps along the way, we let go of that end goal and we see that what we're really trying to work on is moving our child along their developmental level.
Right.
And self-monitoring is a great skill to help us recognize that our child is moving along their developmental level. It's like premature babies versus full-term babies. Full-term babies are on the regular bell curve of height and growth and head circumference. Premature babies are not on that curve. But as long as they're growing on their own little special curve, then they're still healthy babies.
Right.
And the curves may look really different, but we don't say, oh my God, this premature baby is failing because they're not the same size as a full-term baby.
Right.
Our kids, instead of saying they have to get an A on the test, we can be saying our kid has to be growing on their own curve. And that's the message I want to give parents here. Yeah.
And then, for ourselves too, as adults, when we are trying to set our own goals, when we're working on our own, self-monitoring, is we got to give that level of grace, right? That comparison trap can be so dangerous. I can look at my neighbor and be like, oh, she can keep her whole house clean and all her laundry's done and da-da-da-da-da. I'm not my neighbor. I don't know what else is going on in my neighbor's life. I know that I have to improve from where I am a little bit at a time, and eventually we'll get there.
Yes.
So starting small, building the skills, keeping it simple so we don't, as ADHDers, we have a tendency to, hyper focus on the goal setting, right? I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to fix everything all at once. And it doesn't happen. It's not sustainable. So keeping it simple so that it's manageable and that we can actually make those improvements.
I think I'm going to take away, in addition to all those great points, 2 other things. The first is the definition we were able to create about masking versus self-monitoring, where masking leads to emotional overload and explosions because we're not really listening to ourselves, listening to our bodies, listening to our emotional needs, but we're faking it in order to be able to pretend to be neurotypical. Whereas self-monitoring is being who we are, but using the social competency concepts we talked about to be able to say, how can we be who we are and still be successful in the world around us? And self-monitoring is critical to being successful in that way. It, I think, is an important distinction. And related to that, the second piece is that good self-monitoring helps us be better social partners. That we can be more successful in a variety of social settings if we're doing good self-monitoring, because then we can learn to read the room, so to speak. We can change our expectations and be able to fit in better on our own terms.
Right.
That's critical. We're not trying to be neurotypical, but we're trying to be accepted for who we are by being able to fit into the spaces we want to fit into.
Yeah. Well, great again, as usual. Love our chats and our back and forth and the push and pull. It's great.
I always love when we come to new understandings together, and I think we did that a couple ways today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, if you have any questions on the subject, comments, things you want to add to the conversation, please put them in the comments. We will be reading them and building future content based on your conversations. Susan, if you need some help figuring out how to do this in your own life for your kids or for yourself, Susan, where can they
reach
find
out
you?
to me on my website, drsusanblumberg.com, or you can schedule an appointment with me at callcoachsusan.com.
Highly recommend it. Susan's great at helping you narrow down, come up with your own goals and learn these skills for yourself. So we are ending just a couple minutes early because we have some other things to get to today.
Yes, I apologize for
No
not
problem.
taking our full time. I just have an urgent appointment to get to. Next week, we're going to continue our executive functioning talk.
Yes.
Do you have our next topic, Nicole?
I do. Let me find where I wrote it down. Hold on.
I'm sure I have it as well.
Next week will be planning and prioritization.
Oh, excellent. We're going to be really
yeah. It's not an area of strength for me, but I'm working on it. And the stack of planners to choose from behind me.
I have an even bigger stack, I promise.
So many.
I need to run. I'll see you all next week.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. This video is not a substitute for counseling, psychotherapy, medical, or mental health care. The information and advice shared here should not be used in place of any form of diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Information provided here does not involve diagnosis or treatment of medical or mental or psychological disorders. If you feel the need for professional support, please seek a local professional in your area. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only.